Thank you, Senator Toomey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Chopra, when you came before this committee for your nomination hearing, you said that you preferred that the CFPB not be on appropriations because you believed that independent agencies are able to stay more clear of political influence. Do you stand by that opinion?
I do.
Okay. Here's a problem. Under your tenure at the CFPB, it's become as politicized and as far left as I've seen any federal agency ever. It seems the only political influence the CFPB is not subject to is the influence of the elected representatives of the American people, which is sometimes known as democracy. Now, some have suggested that the CFPB is accountable because you were confirmed several years ago, and because you have to come up here twice a year and answer or not answer questions from my colleagues and me. But let's be honest about the reality here. We're going to raise a lot of concerns today. And at the end of the hearing, you're going to leave. And if you want to, you can choose to just ignore everything that is said here at this podium, and there's nothing anybody here can do about it. I would remind my colleagues, the Fifth Circuit Court has recognized this lack of accountability to be unconstitutional. There's a very good chance the Supreme Court will as well. And that's why I think it'd be a good idea to begin discussions now about legislation that would remedy this. Quick, I think this is a yes or no question also, Mr. Chopra. Do you believe that Congress should change the CFPB's governance structure to that of a multi-member commission?
Well, that's really Congress's decision.
I get that. You're correct, 100%. It is Congress's decision. But would you recommend it to Congress?
Well, my own experience, having served on both a multi-member and a single director, there are pros and cons of each. I think there's more accountability with a single director. With a commission, you can point the fingers at others when something doesn't get done. I saw it myself.
I'm about to run out of time.
Sure.
I get it. But the suggestion that there's accountability, I'm sorry, that is hard to take seriously. There's no accountability here. And at least if there were a commission, there would be multiple voices. There would be different points of view. There would have to be a vote to advance various proposals. I think that would make a lot of sense.
Well, Senator Toomey, I think we take all of the congressional oversight very, very seriously. In fact, a lot of what we have done just in the past year is truly in response to some of the things that you have shared as issues with the CFPB, as well as your colleagues. We also think that for the long term, there are so many issues that we ultimately have to do together, and we try our best to be responsive to all of that. In fact, Congress has passed laws.
I'm going to run out of time here. I understand. I have no doubt that that is your impression, but I know that you're aware that impression is not shared by most senators on my side of the aisle. So there's a difference of opinion there. Let me ask you a couple of questions about the new rule that you proposed this week. And let me start with a hypothetical. Let's say the California Department of Financial Protection agrees to a consent order to settle an enforcement action that it brought against a non-bank lender for violating state consumer law. And in this case, the CFPB isn't involved in the case in any manner whatsoever. It seems clear to me that the CFPB has no authority to enforce California's consent order. But under the rule you proposed this week, the non-bank would have to report the consent order to the CFPB to be included in a new public database, and a senior executive of this non-bank would have to attest as to whether or not their institution was complying with this order. Now, here's my question. What would you do if this non-bank said it was compliant with the order, but you disagreed?
So as a factual matter, what you're saying is not exactly accurate. It's for certain supervised entities that attestation would be required. So this is a proposed rule. And what I'd share is that in the proposal, we outline what are the consumer laws that in some ways are derivatives of similar unfair, deceptive, or other consumer financial laws. So generally speaking, this is really for states and all of us to coordinate. Often you have an entity that violates the law in one state and picks up and moves to someplace else. This helps everyone coordinate and detect fraudsters, which often rip off people all across the country.
My concern is this could be used as a hook to give the CFPB leverage to enforce other agencies' state consent orders.
Well, generally violations of law at some of these state consumer laws sometimes are often federal law violations, but I hear what you're saying, and we will take the comments in the record very seriously.
Well, that's a real concern that I have. I'm also concerned about, and I know I'm out of time, but let me just make my point here, Mr. Chairman, and that is that the CFPB is, in fact, implementing a disparate impact standard without using that phrase. And I worry that the effect of that is the possibility that the CFPB would not feel obligated to observe the guardrails that the Supreme Court has imposed on the application of disparate impact.
May I respond, Mr. Chairman? I think that is not accurate. If you look carefully at the unfairness language in the statute that was codified by Congress in 1994 in the FTC Act and repeated in the Consumer Financial Act in 2010, that is not about disparate impact. It is about injury, reasonable avoidability, and countervailing benefits. I'm happy to talk with you more about that, Senator Toomey, but I just totally disagree.
Well, I know you do, but in your press releases and in the exam manual, you refer to the UDAP authority providing the prohibition on unfair practices and that it does not require an element of intent. This starts to sound a lot like the definition of disparate impact without using the phrase disparate impact. And what concerns me is the application of disparate impact is constrained by the Supreme Court, and you should follow that constraint if you were to be implementing. And finally, UDAP's a longstanding concept, in fact, codified, and for 100 years, nobody discovered that disparate impact was somehow embedded, but
I think that
CFPB
reflects a fundamental misunderstanding of unfairness, what Congress codified in 1994. And again, I'm happy to speak to you about it after this.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Senator Toomey. Senator Reed of Rhode Island is recognized.